Hi, this is Amy with Book Goonie, and I'm bringing to you a Fragment Friday and a mini review. Just kind of kill two birds with one stone. This is not a new book. It's been out, I think, since 2009. I'm going to read the first chapter of Fallen from Lauren Kate. I've just now recently read it, and I thought the first chapter was fabulous. The beginning, Helston, England, September 1854. Around midnight, her eyes at last took shape. The look in them was feline, half determined and half tentative, all trouble. Yes, they were just right, those eyes, rising up to her fine, elegant brow, inches from her dark cascade of her hair. He held the paper at arm's length to assess his progress. It was hard, working with her in front of him, but then he never could sketch in her presence. Since he had arrived from London, no, since he had first seen her, he had to be careful always to keep her at a distance. Every day now she approached him, and every day was more difficult than the one before. It was why he was leaving in the morning for India, for the Americas. He didn't know or care. Wherever he ended up, it would be easier than being here. He leaned over the drawing again, sighing as he used his thumb to perfect the smudged charcoal pout of her bottom lip. This lifeless paper, cruel impostor, was the only way he could take her with him. Then, straightening up in the leather library chair, he felt it, the brush of warmth on the back of his neck. Her mere proximity gave him the most peculiar sensation, like the kind of heat sent out when a log shatters to the ash in a fire. He knew without turning around she was there. He covered her likeness on the bound papers in his lap, but he could not escape her. His eyes fell on the ivory upholstered settee across the parlor, where only hours earlier she turned up unexpectedly, later than the rest of her party, in a rose silk gown, to applaud the eldest daughter of their host after a fine turn of the harpsichord. He glanced across the room, out of the window to the veranda where the day before she'd crept up on him, a wistful of wild white peonies in her hand. She still thought the pull she felt toward him was innocent, that their frequent rendezvous in the gazebo was merely happy coincidences. To be so naive. He would never tell her otherwise. The secret was his to bear. He stood and turned, the sketches left behind on the leather chair, and there she was, pressed against the ruby velvet curtains in her plain white dressing gown. Her black hair had fallen from its braids. The look on her face was the same as the one he had sketched so many times. There was the fire, rising in her cheeks. Was she angry? Embarrassed? He longed to know, but could not allow himself to ask. "What are you doing here?" he called, hear the snarl in his voice, and regretted its sharpness, knowing she would never understand. I couldn't sleep," she stammered, moving toward the fire and his chair. "I saw the light in your room," and then she paused, looking down at her hands. "Your trunk, outside the door. Are you going somewhere?" "I was going to tell you," he broke off. He shouldn't lie. He had never intended to let her know his plans. Telling her would only make things worse. Already he had let things go too far, hoping this time would be different. She drew near, and her eyes fell on his sketchbook. "You were drawing me?" Her startled tone reminded him how great the gap was in their understanding. Even after all this time they'd spent together the past few weeks, she had not yet begun to glimpse the truth that lay behind their attraction. This was good, or at least it was for the better. For the past several days, since he had made the choice to leave, he had been struggling to pull away from her. The effort took so much out of him that as soon as he was alone, he had to give in to his pent-up desire to draw her. He had filled up his book with pages of her arched neck, her marbled collarbone, the black abyss of her hair. Now he looked back at the sketch, not ashamed at being caught drawing her, but worse. A cold chill spread through him as he realized that her discovery, the exposure of his feelings, would destroy her. He should have been more careful. It always began like this. "More milk with a spoonful of treacle," he murmured, and his back still to her, and then he added sadly, "It helps you sleep." "How did you know?" "Why, that's exactly what my mother used to." "I know," he said, turning to face her. The astonishment in her voice did not surprise him, yet he could not explain to her how he knew, or tell her how many times he had administered these very drink to her in the past when their shadows came, how he held her until she fell asleep. He felt her touch as though it were burning through his shirt. Her hand lay gently on his shoulder, causing him to gasp. They had not yet touched in this life, and the first contact always left him breathless. "Answer me," she whispered. "Are you leaving?" "Yes." "Then take me with you," she blurted out. Right on cue, he watched her suck in her breath, wishing to take back her plea. He could see the progression of her emotion settle in the crease between her eyes. She would feel impetuous, then bewildered, then ashamed by her own forwardness. She always did this, and too many times before he had made the mistake of comforting her at this exact moment. "No," he whispered, remembering, always remembering. "I sail tomorrow. If you care for me at all, you won't say another word." "If I care for you," she repeated, almost as if she were speaking to herself. Don't. I have to say it. I love you. I'm quite sure, and if I leave, I save your life." He spoke slowly, trying to reach a part of her that might remember. Was it there at all, buried somewhere? Some things were more important than love. "You won't understand, but you have to trust me." Her eyes drilled into him. She stepped back and crossed her arms over her chest. This was his fault, too. He always brought out her contemptuous side when he spoke down to her. "You mean to say there are things more important than this?" she challenged, taking his hands and drawing them to her heart. Oh, to be her and not know what's coming. Or at least to be stronger than he was and be able to stop her. If he didn't stop her, she would never learn, and the past would only repeat itself, torturing them both again and again. The familiar warmth of her skin under his hands made him tilt his head back and moan. He was trying to ignore how close she was, how well he knew the feel of her lips on his, how bitter he felt that all of this had to end. But her fingers traced his so lightly. He could feel her heart racing through her thin cotton gown. She was right. There was nothing more than this. There never was. He was about to give in and take her in his arms when he caught the look in her eyes, as if she had seen a ghost. She was the one to pull away, and a hand to her forehead. "I'm having the strangest sensation," she whispered. No. Was it already too late? Her eyes narrowed into the shape, into his sketch, and came back to him, her hands on his chest, her lips parted expectantly. "Tell me I'm mad, but I swear I've been right here before." So it was too late. He looked up, shivering, and could feel the dark descending. He took one last chance to seize her, to hold her as tightly as he had been yearning to for weeks. As soon as her lips melted into his, both of them were powerless. The honeysuckle taste of her mouth made him dizzy. The closer she pressed against him, the more his stomach churned with the thrill and the agony of it all. Her tongue traced his, and the fire between them burned brighter, hotter, more powerful with every new touch, every new exploration. Yet none of it was new. The room quaked, and aurora around them started to glow. She noticed nothing, was aware of nothing, understood nothing besides their kiss. He alone knew what was about to happen, what dark companions were prepared to fall on their reunion. Even though he was unable to alter the course of their lives, yet again he knew. The shadows swirled directly overhead, so close he might have touched them, so close he wondered whether she could hear what they were whispering. He watched as the cloud passed over her face. For a moment he saw the spark of recognition growing in her eyes. Then there was nothing, nothing at all. That is a great first chapter. I just want to talk a little bit about the book. This is an Angels or a Fallen Angels type series. It is also one of 3 books I've read recently that kind of the mystery behind the book goes back in time. And this one was one example in the 1800s of the 2 of these guys, which we will find out later is Luce and Daniel, that have been lovers throughout time, and they keep going through a cycle and a cycle and a cycle. Spellbound also is that way, and Blue Bloods. So those 3 have some similarities as far as the mystery and the love affair kind of keeps repeating itself. Luce, or Luce goes to stay in a prep school, or really a reform school, called Sword and Cross in this particular book, because she has a history of seeing black ghosts or wraiths or shadows. And there was an incident where she almost kissed a boy, Trevor, and there was an accident in the house with a huge fire, and they can't pin it on Luce, but they think that she had something to do with it. So that's how she ends up at Sword and Cross. She meets a kind of a crazy cast of characters. Ariane, Molly, Gabe. These girls are all very bizarre. It reminded me of kind of Girls Interrupted, girls in a institution. Kind of crazy. But we start to find out that, slowly she's interested in Daniel. He's the brooding guy, doesn't want to give her a time of day, but then they keep getting thrown together and have this moment. But it's not easy, and he keeps pushing her away, and she doesn't realize it goes back to this cycle over and over again. The other love interest, his name is Cam, and he's that typical athlete, jock looking, but way smoother. There's actually a really great quote in here that explains it. She explains that Cam was so much clearer, easier to figure out, like he was algebra, and Daniel was calculus, and she had always loved calculus. The way it sometimes took her an hour to figure out a single proof. So Cam is definitely a good interest. He's always sweet-talking her, making her melt, but there's just something about Daniel that she's more interested in. And the thing that causes the cycle to start back over is when Luce and Daniel finally kiss. But something changes this time for some reason. She knows more. They have their first kiss, and it doesn't cause them to cycle over again. And it's really towards the end, it definitely starts escalating the story and trying to fill in the backstory. The backstory is a little bit confusing for me. It wasn't exactly easy to follow. It sounded a little bit fanciful, which, is fine. But the characters, Luce, Daniel, Cam, and then even the quirky secondary characters are definitely really likable. You want to see how the story's going to end, but it definitely leaves you hanging. So I'm looking forward to reading Torment and see if I can understand a little more of the world that Lauren Kate created. So if you haven't already read it, pick it up. I think the third and the final book is already out, Passion, which kind of makes it easier to read the series because you can go from one to the next. And so, thank you.